Fellow Falcoholics, what is up? Welcome to episode 244 of the Falcoholic Live. I'm your host, Kevin Knight at Falcoholic Kevin, joined by my co-host. He is Adnan Ikic at Say Which Way. Adnan, welcome back. Well, I guess you weren't really gone, so just welcome in general. How are you doing tonight?
Doing good. It was a very rainy day today in Atlanta, but it's been a pretty mild summer so far, I would say. Weather hasn't even hit the 90s yet. So, just enjoying the weather these days.
Yeah, no, I think it was a high in the 60s here in Syracuse today. So it was actually like slightly chilly, but it was also rainy. Although unfortunately, it sounds like we're going to be getting some more of that wildfire smoke coming back in this weekend. So not looking forward to that. But the temperatures were immaculate, so happy about that. But welcome in everyone to the Falcoholic Live. This is it for news, guys. Okay, like this is it. We got news for minicamp. We got notes. We got some tryouts, we got some injury updates, and then it's going to be nothing from now until late July. So, enjoy this last show with real news. Maybe we'll get a random signing, I guess, before camp, maybe.
That weather talk was actually supposed to last us 20 minutes. So.
Yeah, I needed to stretch that out more. That's my bad. Yeah, no, I that's a mishandling of resources. But I said to Adnan before the show that like we don't necessarily have to go for like 90 minutes every single time. But now I sort of feel like we have to. Like we just can't help ourselves. We find something to talk about. So we enjoy it. We enjoy talking to you guys, and we're here to bring you some Falcons takes, and we will be continuing to do so even through the dead period, of course.
Shout out to all the fellow sickos out there who are here in mid-June to listen to talk about the Falcons.
Yes, these are the same folks that'll be here for I guess there's no more fourth preseason game, but the third preseason game or whatever the equivalent of that is. We'll have those guys. That's probably you guys, all 32 of you here for the start of the show here in the midst of June. So we appreciate that. We'll be getting to lots of stuff today. Reminder to like, subscribe, leave us that 5-star review if you're listening to the podcast audio. We appreciate that. And if you're interested, we did just get the training camp dates. So if you're interested in helping support our coverage, getting us to camp, the donation link's in the show description. All donations this month are going towards that training camp fund. Appreciate everyone who's already contributed. We're already $53 in. So good job, guys. Appreciate that big time. And we're looking forward to bringing you that sweet training camp content once again. So before we get started with the takes, want to read you a message from our sponsor, betonline.ag, your number one source for all your sports stats, info, news, and scores. You can get the latest odds in line and the latest matchup reports for all of your favorite sports, including NFL and NFL futures. Right? I always go back to, you can bet on the Falcons if you're a degenerate. I don't necessarily recommend it, but I mean that over/under number for Atlanta, it's kind of low, right? So maybe you get in ahead of the curve, right?
I know the sponsors won't like me saying this, but yeah, I'm not a gambler. Like I don't bet or anything. My advice always is to never bet on your favorite team regarding anything.
No, that's wise. It's very wise.
Because it's too much bias and too much we have guys here who are during the preseason talking about, oh yeah, I put down some money on the Falcons tonight. Like why? It's the preseason. Like what are we even doing here? But yeah, so I don't know. My advice is always don't put any action on your favorite team.
Yeah, no, that's very wise from Adnan there. It's too much emotion involved. It's not a very smart bet typically. But no matter who you're betting on, guys, BetOnline is your sports intel headquarters this season. So they've got you covered for all your insider sports wagering needs. Basketball's over, but there's still MLB, golf, UFC, boxing, all that until we get started here with the NFL in a couple months. And BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to get your betting info, including live betting options and your favorite casino and card games you can play right from your home. So head to the website today or use your mobile device, not ours. Please don't use my mobile device to do that. to get in on the action. Be sure to use our promo code, however. BLEAV is the code. It's BLEAV to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Bet online where the game starts. All right, Adnan, where do you want to start today? Should we talk about maybe some injury updates? That's good. That's some positive news after we unfortunately had the Avery Williams news last week.
Yeah. We could use some good injury news because it's man, I'm still really bummed out about the Avery Williams stuff.
Yeah, it's brutal. Feel for Avery, but he's young and kind of made himself indispensable to the team. So I have a feeling he's going to be just fine, thankfully for him. But we did get some great news in that Taquan Graham, who was one of sort of the breakout players on the defensive line from last year, unfortunately missed the back half of the season with a season-ending injury. He was back in full today and had practiced earlier this week as well. So he is back, and Taquan Graham not necessarily needed to be a starter this year, but I really like his upside, and having him as I think the third guy in the rotation is a good role for him. What do you think about Taquan Graham finally returning to the lineup?
No, I mean, he was sort of breaking out last year.
Yeah.
Like he was having a really good season, outside of that, fumble against the Chargers that, we won't mention. That,
we don't talk about that. Yeah. He doesn't play offense, guys. Okay. Like, come on.
He saw his moment for glory. He's like, this is my chance. Big fellas, when you recover the fumble, just, on a tangent, just go down, like go out of bounds. Like, you're not meant to carry it. But yeah, it sucked that he was put on IR last year, and I think it was late November.
Yeah,
because he was looking good. Like last season, he was, I would say, the best interior defensive lineman outside of Grady Jarrett. Not that that's a very high bar, or not that has been a very high bar in this franchise for the past decade. But I'm happy that he's back. It looks like he'll be all systems go for training camp. This is one of those guys that was, so far he's looking like sort of a day 3 gem. And he's someone that will really help this interior defense. The entire depth along the defensive line is just so exciting this year. I'd say that's probably one of the strongest parts of the defense. They're outside of Grady, of course. There's no real superstar along the defensive line, but it's deeper than I can ever remember it on an Atlanta Falcons team. And it's just one of those things where that when one guy checks out, another guy checks in, there's not really going to be much of a drop off. And it's just going to be, I would say it's going to be very difficult for opposing offensive linemen, opposing offensive guards having to face, that amount of fresh bodies who are, quality football players throughout the entire game. So Taquan Graham definitely factors into that equation. And I am looking forward to, seeing how he's going to build on what was a very successful 2022 season.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. I think this was a player that I think really had his best play basically before he was getting hurt, and it was sort of tragic to lose him because he had an enormous opportunity, and I think he did a good job with it. So good on him for playing well. He's gonna, I think, be counted on once again this year. But like you said, the depth on the interior is as good as it's ever been, particularly if we can get Eddie Goldman back at anything similar to what he was playing at before he, missed time for the COVID season and also, retired this last year. So if he can come back into form, that's all of a sudden a really scary group. And they've got other guys in there that I think are sort of unheralded, but are really interesting, like Joe Gaziano, sort of an under the radar signing who Chargers fans raved about him. Like I sort of was like, oh, who is this guy? And they were like, no, he's, yeah. They were like, oh, he's good. Like he is actually good. So, Carlos Davis, yeah.
Goldman's also coming up back refreshed too. Like don't underrate just how much that can do for someone. Especially someone that plays, such a brutal position. Just taking that year off, getting mentally refreshed, physically refreshed, and then coming back at, hopefully 100%. Like, Eddie Goldman, I think he makes the roster, and he could be, one of those sleeper, sort of difference makers a little bit on this team.
Yeah, no, I think so. It's like they have brought in competition for him. I don't think they're putting all their eggs in the Eddie Goldman basket, but I agree. I think he's sort of the favorite at this point. But they still have Timmy Horn from last year, who did start to come into form as an undrafted free agent late in the year.
That's a preseason hero, Timmy Horn.
Yeah. And Carlos Davis, they recently signed to, another guy who's had experience playing the nose. So they do have some guys in here in case that doesn't work out. But I'm definitely interested in, Jay Diaz in the chat mentions he didn't have to come back. He chose to come back and play. And look, if I looked at last year's defensive line and then saw this year's defensive line, I'd want to come back and play on this unit as well. So definitely hoping for good things there. The other player we got an update on was Kyle Pitts. And basically the update is they sort of expect him to be back for training camp, but at this point they don't really have any other updates on him. Basically that he's working back and that they're expecting him to be ready for camp. But that's about, I think, what we were expecting, so there's no surprise there. But are you concerned that he hasn't made it back yet, Adnan, or is this about where you were thinking he'd be returning as well?
No, this is about exactly where I thought so, because torn MCL last year, it was late in the season. It was definitely on the back half. In the back half of the season, he didn't, play any snaps with Desmond Ridder, as we remember. Got hurt in that Cleveland Browns game, and training camp was right around exactly the time when they were expecting him to return, and it's a very positive thing that he hasn't had any setbacks. Because the dangerous part about an injury like that is, throughout all of that time period, if you do end up having a setback, then one setback can become another setback. And then, we saw with Michael Thomas, it wasn't a knee injury, but he had that ankle injury a couple of years ago, and he's pretty much stolen money from the Saints ever since then. But, it is good to see him back. I'm not expecting him to do a lot in training camp, and I don't think he'll be asked to. He's already one of the more proven players on the roster. The next step for him is gonna be, getting over that mental hurdle, especially as someone who I don't think he's had any major knee injuries, in his life. I don't think he had any in Florida. I don't think he had any before then, but no matter what the injury is, just, sort of going out there and making that first cut, especially on a turf field, the way that Mercedes-Benz Stadium is, having that getting back into that first real live action, sometimes that can be the harder than even that physical recovery. But, definitely it is good that he will be back for training camp. Seems like he probably will play at least a little bit in the preseason. And, he'll very likely be 100% for week one, which is the most important thing.
Yeah, I would not be nervous at this point, folks. If training camp rolls around and he's still not back, I think you could start to get a little nervous, but I think as long as he's on the field for some of training camp, I think it's going to be fine. Really, you just want him to get those reps with Desmond Ridder before the season starts, but I think that's not going to be an issue, and I'm just excited to see Pitts back on the field. I know you guys are going to be excited for that as well. Hopefully, it'll be one of the first things we see when we get to Flowery Branch is Kyle Pitts with a big old smile on his face and helmet in hand. But I'm sure we'll get more updates on that as everything approaches, and of course, as soon as we hear anything, we will let you guys know. But yeah, those were the two main updates. We also, of course, are without Avery Williams, who unfortunately is going to be almost certainly out for the season with an ACL injury. It's not impossible that he could return for the very end of the season. It's just very unlikely. We are also without Caleb Huntley, who is returning from a Achilles injury, and I would not expect to see him at all in camp. I think that he's likely to begin on the PUP. And then Eddie Goldman was the other guy that was not out there this week at minicamp. He is on an excused absence, essentially, as he continues. It seems like they're having him basically do conditioning work, separately. He may be at the facility. He's just not practicing. but it sounds like there's no concern about his availability, just that they're trying to work him back gradually. So that was the rest of the updates there. Let's get to the guys who are trying out this week. We had wide receiver Chris Blair, kicker Matthew Trickett, who was a guy that the Falcons had in rookie minicamp, cornerback Blesson Austin, who everyone just calls Bless, which I think is cool. Michael Jacobson, the tight end, DeMarcus Hayes on the offensive line, and then 2 defensive linemen, Kavion Patton and Albert Huggins. I'm not super familiar with Blesson Austin. I've heard of. I think he started actually for I forget who, for like 10 games. But yeah, any of those guys interest you at all, Adnan, at this point?
I'm not gonna lie to you. I don't know those guys.
You don't know any of these? You don't even know Bless?
Genuinely no. Like,
we were supposed to stretch this segment for 30 minutes on. What are you doing? I'm just kidding.
It's come to this. Yeah, we're actually supposed to be ending our weather talk right about now.
Yeah, I think we're right about to the end of the weather discussion. Yeah. No, Bless.
Yeah, like this discussion was supposed to take us to 9 p.m. right now, actually.
Yeah. But Bless Austin, 6th-round pick of the Jets in 2019. He did actually start 10 games for the Jets in 2020, and he started 6 games for them as a rookie. I won't claim to know exactly how well he did. He did not play in 2022. So, we'll see what happens with that, but he is someone who has, some starts under his belt. If the team decides to move on from Breon Borders, who's going to be suspended to start the year, I wonder if Bless is going to be taking that spot. We'll see. But he's probably the most well-known of that group. Trickett, again, was a guy they had in rookie minicamp. He's probably just, someone that's going to be in there and split the kicking work in camp with Koo. So you don't necessarily have to have Koo kicking all the time. And I think the only other guy that I recognize is Albert Huggins, who I think played somewhere and has actually played a decent amount in the NFL. Let me pull it up. But he's another guy that was from the 2019 draft class as a UDFA. He's got, I think, 14 career NFL games. Did play 9 games for the Saints in 2021. Had some pressures, but mostly a depth guy. So it seems like the Falcons are just sort of, again, looking to see if they can find any small upgrades to the bottom of the depth chart. But none of these guys, I think, are super big needle movers, more depth competition. But, interesting to see, again, that I think some of these guys were from the XFL as well. I apologize. I don't know which ones were from the XFL. But, they're not really content still. Even at this being like the last basically on-field session until training camp, they're still looking at guys. So that they're consistent with that, doing that work at churning the roster.
We talked about how we've raved about how nice it is. It's a nice change of pace that these guys, the front office is absolutely never satisfied. They're constantly trying out guys from other leagues. Like they tried out that CFL tight end too yesterday. The guy who used to play for the Colts, Nikola Kalinic. So I don't really know anything about it. He plays for Hamilton. The only thing I do know that is a fun fact is that there's actually 3 different, including him, there's actually 3 different people with that same name who are professional athletes. And none of them are related. So you have Nikola Kalinic, the basketball player who plays for Barcelona, who also played for the Serbian national team. You have the most famous one is the one who played for the Croatian national team, who currently plays for Hajduk Split. And then you have, this Nikola Kalinic, who, plays for Hamilton and is a hopeful for the Atlanta Falcons roster. None of those guys are related. 2 of them actually aren't even from the same country as the third. And
Wow.
That's about my entire contribution to this conversation.
A very athletic name, clearly. I mean, you got 3 professional athletes with the same exact name. So clearly the name portends pretty. I mean, look, we're talking about these guys as like fringe NFL players, but that's still like a huge accomplishment. We're talking like 1% of all football players. So,
the other 2 are actually, I think, kind of somewhat famous in Europe too. Like, probably nobody in America has heard of them, but if you follow international soccer, you'll have heard of the soccer player, and you follow the EuroLeague, you'll have heard of the basketball player. So,
Yeah,
you know, this is June conversation at its peak right about now.
I love it. I love it. Well, let me get to Nico's $5 donation here. Thank you so much, Nico. Appreciate that. He says, hi, Kevin and Adnan. What's up, Nico, man? Appreciate you. He says, I know it doesn't seem like a major issue, but 3 of our 4 running backs were injured last season. What do you think we should do about that running back depth with Avery Williams out for all of 2023 in all likelihood? No, I'm not lobbying for Dalvin Cook. Thanks. Yeah. Well, I know you're not. They're not going to go after Dalvin Cook, but I think it's an interesting question because now with Avery Williams gone, there really is a spot for sure. And Caleb Huntley, he's on the roster, but he's almost certainly going to be, on IR to start the season. So yeah, I think it's a good question. Adnan, do you see them sort of seeing, it seems like they do like Carlos Washington, who was the UDFA they brought in, but do you foresee them chasing after a veteran running back or going after maybe another UDFA type guy?
I think both. I think sort of both. I think they're going to bring in a veteran. They're going to have, a heated competition for what all of a sudden is an open roster spot for the Falcons, because like you said, Caleb Huntley's not going to be ready to start the season. Nobody's expecting him to be ready. He had arguably the worst possible injury that a running back can have with the Achilles tear. So you have Bijan Algier, Cordero Patterson, who is probably going to be more so a weapon who Arthur Smith uses all around the line of scrimmage. And, that 4th running back spot is all of a sudden very open with Avery Williams not playing. And, I do think that they do want to go into the season with a 4th running back, because Patterson is getting up there in age. He's going to be more of I don't want to say a gadget player, but he will be someone who isn't going to play that traditional running back role as much. But I think one of the ways that they're mitigating these injury concerns is with the drafting of Bijan Robinson in the first place, that plays a part. That's not the reason why the Falcons brought in Bijan, but it's one of those things that it sort of solves that issue a little bit. You have Robinson, you have Algier. Cordero Patterson will not have as much on his plate. Patterson broke down each of the last 2 seasons toward the end of the year. And, that sort of happened as a result of the insane workload that he had in comparison to the rest of his career. Like, this is a dude that has played wide receiver throughout the majority of his life up until a few years ago. And, he never really carried that sort of a load. A couple of years ago, he really broke down at the end of the year. And last year, he had that knee swelling. He had to have that knee procedure, which landed him on short-term IR. And then at the end of the season, he was sort of, not as efficient. He was actually he was sort of, it sounds mean, but he was sort of wasting carries at the end of the year. But
and that's just because Algier was so good too. Like Algier was just crushing it at the end of the season.
Yeah, he was. But Patterson's yards per carry was also really disastrous too. Whenever he did get that opportunity. But basically, so I'm not really worried about the running back room, but the Falcons have a running back room that can really sort of survive an injury to any of their guys, on the short term. Now, I mean, long-term injuries are a different story, but that's literally any position. But I'm not really as worried, especially considering the fact that Huntley should be back at some point this year. Williams, I'm not expecting to be back. There are, those veteran options. But I definitely think that the Falcons will, I think they'll have a spirited competition for that 4th running back spot where it'll be, the best man wins between the veteran that they bring in and some of these UDFAs that are really, clawing to make any sort of a roster.
Yeah. There's a few guys out there, that aren't going to be expensive, that the Falcons could consider. I don't think it's going to be any of the big names. You know, I brought up J.D. McKissic on another show as someone who might be interesting, but he did suffer a pretty serious injury. So I think there's concern that McKissic may not play again. Obviously, if he's healthy, I think he's pretty intriguing because he's another guy that has some return ability, and that would be a fun, you know, sort of reunion with the Falcons, right? But
he should have never been cut that year when he was cut.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
I legitimately had no idea what they were doing because I think he had a kickoff return for a touchdown in the last week as Arthur Blank was being interviewed, you know, on TV, and you know he was just a shock that they cut him, and then you know he ended up making a pretty good impact, you know, as a valuable piece with Seattle and then Washington.
Yeah. We've also got Dontrell Hilliard, who was just with the Titans. He's actually been extremely efficient. I think his career yards per attempt is like 5.9. He had 6.6 yards per attempt on 22 carries with the Titans last year. And then in 2021, had 6.3 yards per attempt on 56 carries for the Titans. So, you know, I'm sort of surprised he's still out there. He also has some return ability as like insurance. I think he's mostly returned kicks, but he does have, I believe, like 17 career punt returns. Averaged, you know, only about 7 yards per punt return, but he does have experience there as depth. And then there's guys like Justin Jackson and Darrell Williams, who I think are, you know, solid options as a depth guy. So there's certainly options out there, but like we said on last week's show, like there's not really any impetus to sort of go out there and like sign someone immediately. They can probably wait to see what they have, and then maybe add someone before camp if they feel a little bit uneasy with the state of that depth chart. And we got a $2 donation from Brandon Brass. What's up, Brandon? He says, thoughts on DeMarcus Hayes, the offensive line tryout, used to play for Vanderbilt and Georgia Tech. He's listed at 6'5", 315 and can play either tackle. Yeah, Brandon, I mean, I won't claim that I've actually seen DeMarcus Hayes play, so I can't comment on that. But look, if he's a tackle, he's got the size, it seems like. You know, they're looking for a swing tackle. They need one. So there's a big opportunity for someone to be that swing tackle. You know, I think certainly he has a chance at the practice squad. Pretty much any tackle they sign will at this point. So, you know, he's intriguing. I haven't watched his college tape, so I can't really say one way or the other if I think he's got like a really good shot. But I think he's at least someone that's intriguing, and they clearly think so too if they brought him in for a tryout. So, do you ever see him play, Adnan? I know you are in Atlanta. I've seen some tech over the years, but
he didn't really play that much. He played for UGA, played just a few games over in 2019. But yeah, he certainly has the size. He's a former 4-star prospect. He was very, very good, you know, in high school, obviously. He came from junior college. He was the number 2 junior JUCO offensive line prospect, but Atlanta is definitely the camp you want to be in if you are one of these hopeful offensive tackles. And this is just not just regarding Hayes, but anybody. And I'm just speaking on him as at UGA. I don't know. I don't watch Vanderbilt football. I'm sorry.
You're not that big of a masochist.
I'm sorry. I'm no disrespect to the Commodores, but what the fuck do I look like sitting watching random Vanderbilt games? Yeah. But basically, like the Atlanta Falcons just have, outside of McGarry and Matthews, the depth on the offensive line just isn't really there.
Yeah, they cut the one guy I was like somewhat confident in Jermaine Ifedi. So,
Ifedi's gone. You have Tyler Vrabel is the most famous name right now. Who's only
what about Jalen Mayfield? That's a good seg into the next topic, actually. So maybe we should hit that. But
I'd rather not talk about Jalen Mayfield getting any significant snaps to the tackle positions.
Well, you know
Greenidge, you know.
Josh Miles actually, I think, is the favorite right now. He's someone who actually graded out about average according to PFF in his like 200 snaps. So that's something, I guess. But yeah, not super comfortable there. But yeah, speaking of Jalen Mayfield and the offensive line, we did get a pretty. It seems like the second team offensive line has started to sort of coalesce a little bit more. This was the consistent second team offensive line in 11 on 11. Left tackle was Tyler Vrabel, aforementioned Tyler Vrabel. Matthew Bergeron working at left guard. Ryan Newsel, the newsflash, at center. Justin Schaefer at right guard. And then Jalen Mayfield at right tackle. It seems like he has maybe moved back to tackle. What do you think? Does that... some of those guys in the second team offensive line I feel pretty good about. Like, I love newsflash. I think Bergeron obviously is going to end up the starter by the time everything's said and done. But what do you think about the rest of that unit, or even the two guys I mentioned?
I hope. I wish very good health to our starting offensive lineman. I'd be kind of mad if I was Jalen Mayfield. I'm not gonna lie. Like, legitimately, because he was like, that's the position he played in college, and then he really got screwed his rookie year. Like, they didn't even let this man play guard in training camp. And, they just threw him in, at left guard against fucking Fletcher Cox.
Yeah,
and then and then, the New York Giants. And it's just like, and now it's like, all right, so now you're putting him back at tackle. I'd be kind of like, as bad as Jalen Mayfield has been, and he has been very bad in the NFL, the Falcons have done him absolutely no favors. Like, I'm very disappointed in the way he's been mismanaged as a third-round pick just in general. But yeah, it's Tyler Vrabel, yeah. I do think
he stuck around. Yeah,
I think Bergeron is going to be the starting left guard, and I think it will be. If he isn't, then there's going to be some questions asked as, a high second round pick. He should be starting from day one, especially given the fact that his main competition is Matt Hennessy right now for that position. I'm intrigued. The most intriguing name, other than Bergeron, obviously, is Justin Schaefer. I do want to see. I am interested in seeing what he has in training camp in the preseason. This was a shock selection, that they had in the draft, not this past draft, but the draft last year. I'm not really confident in the depth at all right now, but we'll see where it goes. But to be completely honest with you, the names that you mentioned outside of Bergeron, none of them really give me any confidence if those guys have to have any extended snaps in the regular season.
Yeah, I agree. Hopefully we won't have to see that. So, I think it's interesting where these guys are at, and I do think that we're going to need to depend on some of these guys. And Matt Hennessy is going to be, if he's not the left guard starter, then he'll be really good depth for the interior. But it's really at tackle, and it seems like they really want to give Mayfield a shot alongside Vrabel to sort of earn that spot. But I sort of feel like this is a spot where we're more than likely going to see a veteran come in. Like, this could be one of those, like, we get to week 1 of the preseason, that second team offensive line comes in and they get like wrecked, and then we see like an Andy Levitre trade or something, like something similar to that. It's like, oh god, okay, we need someone else in here. But the good news is there's a lot of tackles out on the market right now. I don't know that you're signing any of these guys to be a starter, but in terms of like a depth option, you've still got guys like Eric Fisher. You've got like Tom Compton, legendary, Tom Compton reunion, by the way. He was in Atlanta for the 2016 season. Juwan James of the Ravens, Marcus Cannon, a little bit older, obviously, but he's out there. They've got some options. There are some folks out there that can provide decent depth. It's just
they can always sort of solidify the interior depth of the offensive line by signing Ben Jones, and then you have Dahlman and Hennessy as your backup center and swing guard. So, but that's
yeah. It doesn't seem like Ben Jones' dream is happening, unfortunately. Yeah.
It's not, but man, I just don't get, like, it just makes too much sense. Like,
they just love Drew Dahlman. Yeah. I know that makes you very uncomfortable. I mean, I think it told us everything we needed to know when they passed on John Michael Schmitz for a guard, that they had total faith in Drew Dahlman. Because they could have had the best center in the draft, like a day one high-end starter, and they were like, no, we like Drew Dahlman. So, we'll find out if that was wise or not, but they definitely liked Dahlman, and they felt left guard obviously was the bigger need. So, hey, we'll see. Let's see. Some more ground to cover here. We did get another update on that new return battle that's happening now with Avery Williams out of the picture. We did see Dee Alford featured heavily. Penny Hart, the wide receiver, obviously Mike Hughes, who might be the favorite now, as well as Scotty Miller, Josh Ali, and then UDFA receivers Xavier Malone and Keelan Harris. So those are the guys that were returning punts. So, they've got a number of guys back there. We'll see if anyone sort of wins that job outright. Seems like Hughes probably going to be the favorite considering his experience and ability there. But, yeah. Curious, do you have a favorite of that group right now, Adnan? I mean, we haven't really seen them at all, but
I mean, at the moment it's Hughes, but you can't really.
Yeah, we haven't seen any of them yet.
We haven't seen any of it. Like, I mean, I'm assuming that they would rather Scotty Miller not be the returner, given the fact that he, is probably going to have a bit of a prominent role in the offense. As that guy who takes the top off the defense. I mean, hey, shout out to Alford, by the way. He's someone that, was a fringe roster hopeful last year. And now he's sort of expanding his skill set. He'll probably make the roster this year, coming from the CFL. But yeah, we can only just speculate at this point.
Yeah.
Until we get to training camp and until we see it. Like right now Hughes is the favorite pretty much. Like that's pretty much.
And he would be fine. Like if he won the job, I would feel comfortable with that. I do wonder. Hughes hasn't been as elite. UCF legend Mike Hughes. His final season in college, he was like the best kick returner in college football. I think he had 3 return touchdowns, 2 on kicks and 1 on, or maybe it was 2 punts and 1 kick return. Hasn't had that much success at the NFL, healthy averages there, but we'll see. But yeah, on the topic of Dee Alford, that's the next place I wanted to go, which is that basically Dee Alford is the number 2 nickel slot corner right now, and has been basically rotating in there with Mike Hughes at the slot spot. So it's not like the Falcons aren't necessarily just handing that job to Mike Hughes, who I think, is a really good depth option because he can play both outside and inside. If he were to lose that battle, I don't think it's a terrible thing. He's making like 2 point something million. That's fine if he's like your primary depth corner. But it seems like Dee Alford actually is like being featured in an actual competition there. And maybe, right now, obviously Clark Phillips probably still getting worked in. So we'll see how much of a factor Phillips is later on. But what do you think about Dee Alford, perhaps winning that slot job outright?
I think it'll be a bit of a mountain to climb for him. It's a very large hill to climb at the very least, because, you do have Hughes who, as you mentioned, he was brought in as, someone who, has experience in that position. When we signed him, we thought instantly, yeah, this is going to be your slot corner. He has familiarity with the coaching staff, with the DB's coach. So he's definitely the favorite. And then you have Clark Phillips, who I think is, in that second place, role regarding favorites after everything he did in college. After, how much everyone raved about the Falcons getting him in the draft. I don't think that Phillips, is tall enough to play on the outside, but I do think that, he is, good enough to have a future as a starting slot corner in this league. Maybe, maybe not in day one, maybe yes in day one, but, it's good for Alford to sort of be I don't want to say cross-trained because, he's a corner, that's his position. But I do think that it's one of those things where the coaching staff is sort of looking ahead. I don't think Alford will end up being the slot corner, but it's one of those things where they're getting him a bit familiar with the role just in case you need him, to slot in, pun intended, slot into that role, in the regular season in case of an injury or in case, something unexpected happens, to where, all right, now you have Alford, who can just step into that slot corner role and, hopefully not miss a beat because he does have some familiarity. I don't know. I feel like their approach right now with some of this stuff, not just him, but, we're talking about Avery Williams being cross-trained at different positions at wide receiver, cornerback, running back. It feels like the coaching staff has a completely different approach right now in comparison to that first season under Arthur Smith, where we just mentioned Jalen Mayfield, not being played at guard at all until week 1. But, it definitely feels like some lessons learned. And I do like that they're sort of bracing for, anything to happen because it's the NFL where everything does happen. And, I don't think that it's in their plans to have Alford starting there, but I think that in case he needs to step into that role, they want him to be ready.
Yeah, no, and I think it's wise. With Clark Phillips, the thing with him too is that he hasn't played slot much. He played it like 1 or 2 games in college. So it may take time for him to learn that role too. And remember Dee Alford coming from the CFL. He was an outside corner in the CFL, had to learn how to play the slot here. So it may be a gradual thing for Clark Phillips. And we'll see, where he ends up slotting in. But again, the depth I think should be really good. And I think all these guys having that versatility to move into the slot at worst, it's going to help them make the roster. And I think it would have been, it's good to have that reliable depth there. Let's see what else we got here. So we got some John Fitzpatrick news. He's also back for those that weren't aware. Obviously, Fitz missed the entire 2022 season with an injury he suffered in training camp. But he's back, and it seems like he's one of the primary run blocking tight ends for this team. The Falcons have Kyle Pitts, they have Jonnu Smith, and then they've got Parker Hesse, who's sort of his own unique type of blocker. In terms of their like pure blocking specialist, yeah.
Franks too, the tight
that's
end.
Right. I forgot. My bad. I shouldn't slander that man. But John Fitzpatrick coming in, he's working with the offensive line, doing run blocking drills when the other tight ends are doing like pass catching drills. So it seems like he may end up being one of the blocking specialists. We didn't see the team re-sign Michael Pruitt like we thought. So it seems like maybe John Fitzpatrick is going to be the beneficiary of that. What do you think about Fitzpatrick finally getting an opportunity, hopefully healthy, in 2023?
I mean, he's legitimately right now one of the favorites, or he is the favorite for the blocker specialist tight end role. Like legitimately, that's a role that Arthur Smith likes to have, on his roster. Right now, if there are no other signings, I would, project Fitzpatrick to be on the 53-man roster. As of right now it's June 14th. That's what I'm expecting now. Obviously, a lot can happen between now and training camp, let alone between now and week 1 of the season. We don't know who they're going to bring in. They brought Michael Pruitt in last year, remember, in the middle of training camp.
Yeah. Wouldn't rule that out either.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm actually really shocked that they haven't brought Michael Pruitt back. I don't know what's up with that. Like,
I would have already signed him.
Yeah, is it a money thing? Is it like, is it Michael doesn't want to play anymore? I don't know. I'm not really going to speculate, but like that, he looked really good last year. Like I'm really sure. Maybe it is they're just that confident in the guys that they have on the depth chart right now, or maybe they just don't. Maybe they know that if they bring it back through it, maybe they'll have to part ways with Felipe Franks, and Arthur Smith can't do that.
That would be brutal. Yeah.
I'm shocked, like, because it doesn't really cost you much to at least have Pruitt in here for camp. Season isn't starting tomorrow, but that's neither here nor there. It's right now we're really splitting hairs looking at, why haven't they brought Michael Pruitt back? But
Yeah.
to stay on topic, to answer the question about Fitzpatrick, as of right now, he does project on the 53-man roster.
I would have him as the tight end 4.
He is that specialist. Like the other guys, the other tight ends, like Kyle Pitts is pretty much your wide receiver 1. Jonnu Smith is, pretty much your tight end. And Parker Hesse isn't as strong of a blocker, and Felipe Franks, I mean, we don't even have to talk about him right now, but Fitzpatrick is that specialist right now on your team.
Yeah. So I do agree that he's a favorite for the roster at this point. And I think the thing with Pruitt is I think he's going to be 32 this year or 33. So he is getting up there. Tight ends do routinely play, into their mid-30s without issue. But I do believe that they want to give these young guys a chance. But I wouldn't be surprised if they're not seeing the growth they want or the play that they want from these guys that Pruitt makes a return in camp. But yeah, I mean, the only thing I can think of is that it's the age thing. Maybe he's hoping for more money now. I think based on what he showed last year, he's deserving of money. But yeah, we'll see. But it's funny because Pruitt and Jonnu Smith almost exactly the same in terms of build. Just Pruitt's a much better blocker. So. And I think Smith is a better receiver, certainly, but it's interesting that those two guys are so similar. It's I think I would have brought it back just because, but I don't blame them for wanting to see the guys, especially the guy they drafted too. Because if Pruitt comes in, you have to think he's winning a roster spot, taking a roster spot from one of these young guys, and maybe they're not necessarily wanting that to happen. So. The easiest way to get out of that difficult decision is just to not sign him. So
I mean, I get that, but at the same time, it's I would still want him in camp, to have, to see if the young guys can beat him out too. But, maybe, I don't know. The only thing I can guess right now is a money thing because he hasn't signed anywhere.
No. So it's an interesting one for sure. We'll continue to monitor that. We did get an update on the safety grouping. We got a little tidbit from the last session of OTAs that Micah Abernathy was up there on the depth chart. It seems like now with the full team there, the top 3 is sort of what you'd expect. Obviously, it's Jesse Bates and Richie Grant is the secondary starter. But Jalen Hawkins is the third safety. It seems like the Falcons are playing a fair amount of 3 safety looks, it sounds like. During today's practice, we had Jesse Bates and Richie Grant as sort of the traditional safety alignment, and then we saw Jalen Hawkins up closer to the line of scrimmage, which I thought was interesting. But it seems like it's Bates, Grant, and then Hawkins on the depth chart. So it seems like maybe Hawkins' roster spot a little bit safer than maybe we thought, based on what we saw early in OTAs. But what do you think about that safety trio? Do you feel pretty good about those 3 guys?
I mean, yeah, it's June, but yeah, sure. I like Hawkins as a depth piece. I'm not a huge fan of Jalen Hawkins as starter, but bringing in Jesse Bates sort of, remedied that and to where, you don't have to start Hawkins. Richie Grant, we're really hoping takes that step. It's kind of time, Richie. Last year was his de facto rookie season after he didn't really get much playing time a couple years ago. But remember, this dude was a high 2nd round pick. You use a premium pick for him. You passed on Creed Humphrey for him. Creed right now would look really, really good in a Falcons uniform. Creed would help a lot, but the decision was made, and we're really needing Richie Grant to really take that next step and to really help solidify that secondary a little bit. So I mean, yeah, it's right now it is as it should be. It is as expected. It was, we were we did pause a little bit last time when we heard that Hawkins wasn't the primary backup safety, but he seems to be in that spot now. We'll see. We'll see how everyone performs in training camp. I do expect DeMarco Helens to make the team for his special teams ability. He was I'm talking, of course, about the Falcons' 7th round pick from Alabama. So, I mean, the safeties are as they should be as of right now in June, but we'll see how it looks in training camp. And Rich Grant is one of those guys I'm going to be keeping a really close eye on throughout training camp in the preseason, because we really do need Richie Grant to take that next step at that strong safety position.
Yeah, we do, and I hope we see it. Certainly, another UCF legend that I would love to see excel here in Atlanta. So, hoping for good things there from Richie Grant. Last couple things we'll get to. Lots of praise for Jonnu Smith. I know he was getting brought up in the chat, but basically just a lot of praise for his pass catching ability, which we knew about. Again, sort of a non-traditional tight end. He lines up a lot in the backfield. He does a lot of motion stuff. He can do jet sweeps. Caught 8 touchdowns in 2020 with the Titans. And Smith, to his credit, has said that he feels just more comfortable in an Arthur Smith offense versus what he was in New England, where he had sort of just a down couple of years. And basically they talked about how much he's going to move around. What do you think about Jonnu Smith? I know you're high on him like I am, but I mean, do you think he really can be a significant piece of the offense, getting like a pretty decent target share when it's all said and done?
I mean, he was a significant piece of that Titans offense a few years ago. New England, he got paid in New England. Like Arthur Smith got him paid. I mean, everyone was getting paid in New England that offseason. But yeah, he was a very prominent. He had a very prominent role, especially in the red zone. In Tennessee, he had 8 touchdowns his last season in Tennessee. He had 1 combined in each of the last 2 years in New England. But yeah, Jonnu is going to be on the field a lot. I think they will utilize him a little bit on the jet sweep. I think he will be a major factor in the red zone the way he was, with Ryan Tannehill in Tennessee. He's not going to get you a lot of yardage, but he doesn't have to. This will be a run-heavy team after all. You do have Kyle Pitts and Drake London there to suck up the majority of the target share. But, I think Jonnu Smith will definitely play a very prominent role. And, there's a lot of familiarity. We know that he's incredibly excited. He was incredibly excited when presented with the prospect of getting traded to Atlanta. Arthur Smith knows what he's all about. And, he's someone that, was a very strong tight end under the Arthur Smith offense. And anyone who plays fantasy football can tell you that.
Yeah. No, I've like jokingly called him Arthur Smith's red zone secret weapon, but that's not even a real joke, because he did catch those 8 touchdowns. I think that Kyle Pitts, Drake London, Bijan, or whoever's at running back, they're going to get the attention. And so someone like Jonnu Smith, especially if the Falcons are in a multiple tight end alignment, it's really hard when you're lined up in 12 or 13. It's such a run heavy call that usually, you sort of by default, you treat those tight ends as like blockers. And it makes it really difficult when you've got, your big linebacker lined up on Jonnu, who's more like a big wide receiver in terms of his athletic ability, that he's going to have opportunities to just outrun those guys. And honestly, you look at what Michael Pruitt did last year, and I think Jonnu Smith's just like a better version of that in terms of his receiving. He's not as impactful as a blocker, but he's a better receiver. So it's a little bit of a trade-off, but I think the receiving is more what the Falcons need, because they do have guys like John Fitzpatrick and Parker Hesse there for the blocking.
And we did notice that Desmond Ridder did sort of look Pruitt's way. He looked the way of that tight end as, a little bit of a safety valve, in those few games. And that's something that's very common for any young quarterback to sort of, entrust his tight end a little bit. And I know Kyle Pitts is on the depth chart as, the primary tight end. Kyle Pitts is going to be lined up out wide for most of his snaps. Like Kyle Pitts, I look at more as, as a wide receiver than a tight end, at the moment. I think Jonnu Smith will be the guy who will be more so in that traditional tight end role. These position TE1, TE2, this sort of means nothing in Arthur Smith's offense because you run so many, double tight end looks.
Yeah.
We'll probably see some looks where you have, 3, tight ends on the field at the same time. With Smith, maybe Parker Hesse, Kyle Pitts. But yeah, I think he'll sort of be a little bit of a sleeper pick in fantasy football drafts. Like Jonnu Smith is definitely someone I'm going to be looking at in those, in those late rounds,
late teens
rounds.
Yeah.
Where, he'll, he can get you some production.
Yeah, for sure. That'll be how he's utilized. I'm really curious about because he's one of those sort of wild card players on the offense that not really sure what to expect there, but based on what we've seen from his time with Smith in the past, could be really interesting and be a great player to take advantage of the attention that Drake and Kyle Pitts are going to be getting on pretty much every play. So he should have room to operate there for sure. Last thing we'll mention, a player who is getting shouted out on multiple reports now, and that's former undrafted linebacker Dorian Etheridge, a former preseason darling. Ended up on the practice squad last year, did make the roster the year before, and is still sticking around. Apparently, Etheridge today had an interception off of Taylor Heineke, and he's apparently just been making plays all spring and up to this point. So Etheridge is someone that's interesting. He did immediately make the team as a UDFA. And look, that linebacker group behind like Caden Ellis and Troy Anderson is basically wide open. So there's certainly an opportunity for him. What do you think? Do you think he has a legit shot at this point, based on who the Falcons currently have on the roster?
No, of course he does. Dorian Etheridge is my guy too. Like we remember him being one of the
he had
most
18
exciting
tackles,
guys.
right? That one game or something. It was nuts.
He was so fast too. Like he was moving faster than like anyone on the field. It seemed like this was it 2 years ago? The preseason 2 years ago. It was
2 preseasons ago. Yeah.
Yeah, but like the linebacker depth is wide open right now. You mentioned it. You have Caden Ellis. You have Troy Anderson. And who knows what's going to happen with Michael Walker? Like he is someone that was drafted by the Falcons, but I don't think Walker is a lock to make the roster right now.
Yeah, he was drafted by what? It was the last Dimitrov year, I think. So,
we'll see. But Etheridge, I don't see why Etheridge doesn't have as good of a chance as any non-starter on the roster to potentially make the roster, especially he apparently has a head start right now given the fact that there have been rave reports about him. We'll see what he does in the preseason. We'll see what he does in training camp. That's there for everyone right now as a very fair platform. But I can definitely see a world where Dorian Etheridge makes the team as for one, he's he can help contribute on special teams, and he can definitely be one of those depth linebackers.
Yeah, I think so too. I think he's got a chance certainly. And I think him and Nate Landman are probably better positioned than people think. They elected not to re-sign Rashaan Evans even when we heard that they were like considering it. And I think that shows that they do have faith in some of those UDFA types. They did bring in Andre Smith Jr., who's a really good special teamer. So, I wonder if he's sort of like the back of the roster guy. But I think they're probably looking for more like on-field play from the earlier guys. And we mentioned it last week, right? Like there's 3 guys that all have those 2.7 million cap hits or in savings, basically, that the Falcons could save 2.7 million from cutting Matt Hennessy or Jalen Hawkins or Michael Walker. And like I don't foresee most of those guys getting cut, but I sort of think one of the three will. And I know last week it was Hawkins, but now I'm thinking it might be Walker. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, if one of them is going, I mean, Hennessy's safe.
Yeah, Hennessy's safe, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if Hawkins locks down that primary backup safety spot, which he's the proverbial favorite to do so, yeah, I would say it's probably what I think Walker faces stiffer competition for a backup spot at his position than Hawkins does for his.
Yeah. And like Walker clearly lost favor with Dean Pease, but remember that Frank Bush, the linebackers coach, is still here. So you have to think Frank Bush had input on that. So I do wonder if this is not like, Ryan Nielsen's running a different defense, but the linebacker coach has stayed the same. So I do wonder if Michael Walker's maybe still in the doghouse a little bit, and needing to really prove himself. And like, I think he's certainly capable of it. And I do think his coverage specialty is something that team doesn't really have right now. So that could be a pathway for him to make the roster as more of a coverage focused linebacker, but it's tough because he probably has to prove himself on special teams, which I think he has dabbled in some, but hasn't necessarily been an impact special teamer. He's got to contend with the two UDFAs that we mentioned from previous years in Dorian Etheridge and Nate Landman. Also, Andre Smith Jr. coming in, the vet, and then a couple of other guys. Tay Davis is another special teams guy. Mike Jones Jr., the UDFA from this year. So, it's not an easy path for any of these guys. I think the competition's pretty tough there, and we'll just have to see who ends up emerging victorious. Probably 2 or 3 of those guys make it. So, I'm interested to see who it ends up being. But the $2.7 million, it could be a deciding factor. If Walker is sort of tied with Dorian Etheridge, you have to think they'll lean towards saving the money as opposed to keeping Walker, who this regime did not draft, to be fair. So we'll see.
I mean, yeah, then that's the nature of the business, right? It's but that's the nature of any business. This isn't just the NFL. It's if I'm producing at the exact same level, and let's say that that is the case, as another guy, but that person is making less money than I am, then and only one of us can be kept, then the firm will keep that other person. That's just, I don't know, it's just the way it sort of works. I mean, it kind of sucks, but
it does.
I mean, that's how it goes.
That UDFA contract's looking mighty tempting right now. So
there's only so many roster spots.
Yeah, it's very true. So we will see what becomes of that. But we did it, Adnan. We stretched it over an hour. I'm proud of us. We had 2 days of practice that really only a few people even got to see, and we stretched that into over an hour of talk. So good on us. Thanks to everyone for hanging out with us tonight. We're going to get through this dead period. Next Wednesday, I believe we're going to do our season predictions, because we never actually did a schedule breakdown show because I was out of town when it happened. And then it was let's save that content for the depths of the offseason. So I think we'll probably do a schedule breakdown and season prediction show soon. On Monday, I've got a show coming up with Will McFadden where we look at the top breakout players to watch. And we'll be firing up some training camp related stuff in the future, as well as we sort of get towards the end of June. But yeah, subscribe if you enjoyed tonight's show. We really appreciate that. Check us out on Discord. The link's in the show description. If you're interested in supporting the show on Patreon, getting involved in our patron fantasy leagues, which we're going to be forming here pretty soon. We have, whoever wants to join, you're welcome to sign up on Patreon, patreon.com/Falcoholic Live. You also get some exclusive show perks and, of course, our gratitude. So hit that up. But yeah, looking forward to it. If you're listening to this show off the air and you'd like to contribute to the training camp fund, you could do so offline at the link in the show description. And we will be able to read your comment or message on the next show. So don't worry, those are saved, the messages. So just make sure you leave one and we'll be able to get to it on the next show. But yeah, before we take off, want to thank my co-host, as always, Adnan Ikic at Say Which Way. Not anything you're working on that you'd like to plug?
Just going to be doing some of these open threads, just reminiscing on some Falcon stuff in the past. I wrote an article today discussing, the dates for training camp. So if you guys don't know what the exact dates are for camp, then check that out. But yeah, it's just just sort of trying to get through the grind of the depths of the off season right now with just the Atlanta Braves to keep me company at the moment. Oh, and the Atlanta United.
Yeah, it's gonna be tough, but we stretched this content out for an hour, so we can probably stretch out some stuff for at least a couple of weeks here. But pretty soon we're gonna start mining the training camp previews pretty hard. So hey, we're gonna have fun with it. We appreciate everyone for hanging out and hanging out with us, and of course we will be bringing you all of that great content from training camp when that kicks off. I believe the early plan is that I will be there for the first week. Adnan will be there for the second week, but we're going to iron out those details and let you guys know as soon as we know. Maybe we'll even get Evan up there for a day or two, get our director of guest personnel. None of us have ever actually met Evan, so we're not convinced that he's not some, very deep fake AI generation at this point. But we would love to meet, Evan and see for real one way or the other and inform you guys of that. Also got some potentially other cool stuff coming around training camp that I am working on. So we'll see if that pans out or not. But until then, guys, like I said, check out the show coming on Monday. Check us out next Wednesday for our next live. And of course, you can follow me, Kevin Knight, at Falcoholic Kevin, and check out all of the great content we got on thefalcoholic.com. Tonight's show was presented by Bet Online, and we thank everyone for hanging out, chatting, and talking some Falcons with us here in the depths of the dead zone. But we're just a little over a month out from the fire hose of content being turned back on, and then it's going to be off to the races for the 2023 NFL season. So until then, guys, thank you so much for tuning in tonight. We will see you next time on the Falcoholic Live. From myself and from